Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this month's installment of Conscious Conversation, featuring the awesome team of mental health therapists at Nashville Emotional Wellness Counseling here in Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Jack Simon. I'm joined by Hannah, and we are excited to spend some time with you.
Hey everyone, I'm Hannah Baumholt, and today we will be unpacking the topic of the process of self reflection. Conscious conversations are intended to educate, to uplift, and provide guidance on how to deal with life stressors. Our motto here at New is real people helping real people with real problems. And these conversations are an opportunity to have real talk with our therapist. So let's dive in. So, Jack, when I'm thinking of self-reflection, there's so many things that come to mind. So, I'm curious if we could take a moment here and kind of talk about how we define self-reflection. And if you want to go first, that would be great.
For sure. And I think one of the things that you and I really kind of hopped onto pretty quickly when we started talking about this concept, right? It's just how on the surface, how simple it can be, right? Like, think about what you're doing, right? It can be so right there. But actually, when you start taking apart the process involved, it can be quite a complicated situation, quite inspiring, but also, like many things, set up for some difficulties and some traps. So, if I have to define self-reflection in a short way possible, which is a hard thing for me to do, but it starts with, can I add some intentionality to how I monitor myself, how I know myself? And it's kind of one of the first steps in a therapeutic experience where you learn the skills to take a step back and say, okay, what's actually going on here? Right? Because oftentimes we can define our successes and our failures by these parameters outside of ourselves, right? What this person thinks of me, what I should be doing there, what my title at my job is, right? Self-reflection is, but how do I actually feel about that, right? And how do I know how I feel about that, right? How would you define it, right? What are some of the things you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of spoke to a lot of it. Just for me, when I think of self-reflection, again, it goes to like, it can be so many different things. It can literally just be thinking of, oh, how am I feeling right now? And just reflecting on that. Or it could be a little bit more long-term and more intentional. And hey, did I achieve that goal? Or in my work, like I had this big
Mm-hmm.
presentation and how did it go? How did, the like outward metrics of how did
Mm-hmm.
people receive it? Was the message heard? Did it achieve what I wanted it to achieve? But also, like, how did I feel about that? How was I
Mm-hmm.
comfortable? How did I feel in that space? So I think self-reflection is varied, depending on
Mm-hmm.
how you're using it. And definitely has, that intentionality piece, and understanding yourself, but also understanding yourself in context. So yourself in that meeting, yourself in the context of reaching your goal, or in the context of, hey, what else was I going through that day? I think is kind of
Mm-hmm.
to consider too.
Yeah, and it's one of the things in the therapeutic context, right? When we are working with clients, when we're talking, we're hearing stuff, the person is already doing some level of this, right? Something has happened in their life that has prompted them to say, I need some assistance from a mental health professional, right? Something's either not right, or I want to learn, or what have you. But oftentimes, what I'll encounter is individuals that have done that part of the work, and that's kind of where it stops, right? And we'll kind of be playing, well, I feel kind of upset about this thing. Well, tell me why. I don't really know why, right?
Mhm.
Or I thought this would be better than it would be, or this is way better than I thought it would be. Well, why? Right? So, what I think this is doing is adding these layers. I love the word you said, intentionality, adding these layers where I'm going to become an active participant in this process as opposed to just kind of going with it and seeing what happens. And there's a time and a place for both,
Mhm.
right? Because one thing we can definitely agree on, and I'm sure you have dealt with clients like that. I've definitely been one of these clients before, where I'm going to spend every minute of my day reflecting on myself, and I'm going to be so stinking what I should be doing and where I should be going that I miss the opportunity to actually live, right? So we first come out, we talk about this, we're saying it's a good thing, you should do it, you should engage. And I'm going to say right from the beginning, like everything else, it's a spectrum. And you can definitely reflect yourself into passivity and into plateauing, right?
Uh,
So I think that's a really kind of good lead into this idea of intentionality that we've been talking about, this idea of going through it. And I think it's important to reflect the multiple ways that you can do that, right? So you had mentioned short-term goals, long-term goals, what that can be. Maybe it starts with simply, I'm going to pay attention to how I feel about my lunch today. I'm in a position, I'm eating lunch every day. I might be doing it casually while I'm at work. I might be sitting at home and doing it, but that's my daily check-in. My daily check-in is, how do I feel around lunchtime? And my goal might be to simply gauge what my day is doing. And maybe that's my short term, right? It's short, it's to the point, it has a time to it, right? It has a focus around it. But then my longer term goal is, maybe after 2 weeks of checking in every day at lunch, I'm going to pick one dinner time to check in at and think about those 2 weeks overall, right? So it's, you're establishing these parameters to kind of guide where you are. And the benefit of having the parameters and guiding is, by forcing that intentionality, it kind of forces you to think about things a little more directly for what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't actually do that work, if we just assume it will be something, assume it will be something else, we miss the opportunity to just see what's going on. But if I know I eat my lunch from 12 to 1, 12 to 1 is my time to think about how things are going. Okay, that's coming up. I can give it the credit it's due, leave it after that, so I'm not stuck in the head. And then 2 weeks from now, I'm going to think a little bit longer term about that, right? So I feel like that's one way.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of intentionality, kind of where does your head go?
Well, and I love that idea too of having like a set like time and having those cues, because I fall on the opposite end of the spectrum personally. Like prior to, becoming a therapist, self-reflection was not typically a go-to for me. Like I
Mm,
would maybe more so avoid it rather than think about things all the time and be kind of stuck in my own head. And so I think it's really interesting too that you have people who will run the gamut of people like me who are maybe kind of avoiding checking in and being like, no, everything's fine. I don't need to think about that. I don't need to think about how I feel. We're just going to move through. I'm just going to eat my lunch and then we're going to move on to the rest of my day. So I think
mm,
having that check-in time is good to allow yourself that hour so that you don't get carried away, but also allow yourself that hour so that you do it, right?
hmm.
And it's like
And if,
you.
yeah, and if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear maybe some of those things that you think get in the way, or some of those things that are saying, use the term avoid it. I want to avoid doing this, right?
Right.
So, what are some of the things that you would often encounter, either in your own experiences, if you're comfortable, or in some of the individuals you work with? Kind of what gets in the way of people even taking that first small step to see what's going on?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, it was more of just like, well, there's nothing really like huge wrong or huge that's like going
Mm,
on. And so I'm just gonna kind of keep living my life. I mean, because there's always something to do, right? Like we live in a world and in a society and in a time where time is so valuable. And so there's always something I want to be doing next. Um, I am thinking of a client in particular too that I've worked with in the past who loves to be busy. And so I think that just that pace
mm,
kind of makes us think like, oh, there are productive things that we can be doing.
mm,
When in fact,
right.
reflection is very productive. I don't mean to say that it's not, but, I think in our society, taking the time to pause and reflect on how we are and where we are and what has happened to us is not always given that same like shine of productivity or
Hmm.
pat yourself on the back for doing this as say like completing a task or I don't know, doing something, going to a workout class for that hour. It's
Mm. Yeah, and I think you hit on a couple of really cool, like, different tangents on that. Right? I think the first is, why do I need to do this? Nothing is wrong, right? And I think that highlights a big thing, that this is not just a thing you can do to help feel better, right? This is not just something to do when you're sad, when you're angry, or whatever. There are benefits to it when things are going well,
right.
right? Because it gives us that space to say, okay, what does well actually mean for me? And do I believe it's going well? Or if there's something kind of missing there? Because especially when we can get caught up in the rat race, or if we have maybe some of our maybe more of our tangible goals met, I have a roof over my head, I have food in my belly, I'm satisfied with my income, right? We assume, well, I must be doing well, right?
Right.
So one, it's discovering the truth, but the other is it's different to say that I'm doing well, and it's different to fully intentionally appreciate that feeling, right? We're really good at like noticing when things aren't good, right? We're
Yep.
really good at like reminding us, oh, this sucks. Like I know what this feels like, but we can take for granted the beauty and the benefit of sitting in that positivity,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is not so much a thing of, well, how do I track what's wrong and how do I get better? But simply, how do I know myself so I can feel myself, right? That's one big piece of what you're saying. And I think the other piece that you're saying in what I'm hearing, which I agree with tremendously, right? This idea of like what is productive and what is not productive. And that's really a conversation around values,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Is productivity purely based on output? Is productivity purely based on that? Or is productivity showing up for myself to give myself the credit I deserve, right? And I think one of the pitfalls we have as a society is that when so many things are connected to output, when so many things are connected to this kind of tangible productivity, there can be this sense of shame around, well, I don't really deserve to be spending this time because there's other things I can be doing. That's kind of one thing. And then the other thing is that everything is a product, everything is something you can consume, which leads us to think that the only way for me to do this is to go fully all in, right? I need a full hour. I need an app for it. I need a specific, I got to buy something, right? I got to write it down. When in reality, self reflection can be 5 intentional seconds, right? You can
Right.
practice self reflection when you get into an elevator with a bunch of strange people and ask myself, what am I feeling in my body right now, right?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
all
but
about that
do that, you're
intentionality.
not crossing something off of your list, you know?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So there's a larger argument or a larger tangent that I as a therapist I get excited about. Tell me why. What's on your list, right? So I think you tapped on excuse me the productivity piece. They don't have the time. I think another big obstacle is that I don't want to do self reflection because I know what's down there and I don't want to feel it.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely.
Right. So I've done some self reflecting and I didn't like it. So
Mm-mm.
let me kind of get away from that, right? And as any therapist worth their salt is going to tell you, not going to be a recommended course of action,
Sure.
right? So if I come to you, Hannah, and I say, hey, Hannah, I do this thing and I really don't like when I do it, but I don't want to think about it because it makes me feel bad. Like, how might you, as a practitioner, as a clinician, kind of work with me to safely engage in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when clients come to us feeling that way, or even when we feel that way ourselves, like I know for me, something that is not a little bit of the feeling, not like to that extent, but a little bit of the feeling is like when you have a task that you don't want to do and you've been putting it off, and it's something that would maybe take like 5 minutes, like filing your, I don't know, taxes, that takes longer than 5 minutes, but something that, it's creating this stress. The more that you don't address it, the bigger that it gets. And I feel like
Mm,
with self-reflection or with anything really that a client comes in like looking to continue to avoid, part of it is acknowledging, "Hey, like, okay, I hear you. I'm here with you. Let's create some like safety here for you to feel a little bit more comfortable. Let's build some rapport, between the two of us. It's probably not something that we're going to tackle in our first couple of sessions, but let's get
mm,
to a place where you feel safe, you feel more regulated, you feel connected, because through connection, we find so much healing. And then can we begin to talk about like, all right, the more that we're avoiding this, the bigger and bigger it's growing. So maybe we can just tackle one little piece. Like, let's
mm,
just think about, one part of it, or I don't know, even just figuring out ways in which you can get more comfortable with the idea of self reflection or the idea of like being in a space to approach that. I don't think it's,
mm.
push you into the deep end. But how can we make you comfortable with learning how to swim in that pool?
Yeah, I think that is very well spoken, and I see a lot of really strong parallels here between this individual process of self self-reflection and some of the couples work that we do. You
Yeah.
know, you have these couples that always fight about this. We always fight about what we eat on Sunday, always fight what we eat on Sunday. And we don't bring it up any other time of the week because we don't want to tap into that.
Hmm.
Right. So let's just avoid it and whatever. But we know as we avoid it grows and it grows and it grows. So on kind of not the flip side, but kind of adjacent to that, there, oftentimes when someone is highly critical of someone else, right? If someone is highly pointing things out, many times what people are most critical of are the things they're most insecure about themselves on,
Right.
right? And sometimes it's easier to reflect that displeasure onto someone else externally
Hmm.
than to look in the mirror and say, that's what I don't like so much about me. So in those cases, borrowing from the language from IFS, internal family systems, right? We go from I'm not so much self-reflecting on a single thing. I'm paying attention to the different parts of myself,
Hmm.
right? Which part of me is showing up? Can I give them the space to do it? Because if I've got a part of me that tells me I'm really, really, I'm really, really dissatisfied with my station in life, but every time they show up, it really kind of hurts me, and I don't listen to why I'm dissatisfied, right? Then it's just going to run with it, right?
Right.
So what I like about this intentional self-reflection is it lets us remove ourselves from ourselves, if you will, and start seeing things from what they are, right? And that's that intentionality piece. And that, I think, leads us to one of the major pitfalls that can happen with self-reflection, and that's the importance of engaging in it from a lens of self-compassion.
Mm.
Um, we are products of our world. We are influenced by our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, right? This is classic cognitive behavioral therapy. The way that I'm feeling about something is going to affect the way that I'm looking at something, the way I'm going to think about something. And I think one of the pitfalls some people have when they initially don't have the skills to engage in this appropriately is they used it as an opportunity to beat up upon themselves. I didn't do this. I didn't do this. I'm such a terrible person. Woe is me. Why am I doing this? What's the point, right? And if you're someone who maybe has these symptoms continuing to the point of a diagnosis of depression, diagnosis of anxiety, diagnosis of trauma, whatever it may be, right? Start with those clinical terms on it. It can be dangerous when we say, tell me what you think about yourself, right? So that's where this compassion piece comes in. And I mean, there are entire textbooks written on the concept of compassion and doing it. When you hear these words, it's compassion, it's intentionality, reflection, kind of where does your mind go about some things maybe you've seen or some strategies you have for kind of doing that from a compassionate stance?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I think that that's so important. I'm so glad that you brought that up because I feel like a lot of the time, I don't know if this is just like the way that our society typically functions, where people are raised. Like, I'm not quite sure where it comes from. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But I feel like we often are so hard on ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
so that leads to that danger when you're engaging in self reflection. If you have that negative lens, that ultimately, in my opinion, will not serve you. It will serve you much better if you can be compassionate towards yourself and really see yourself for your strengths and your resiliencies and your resources. I think something that I've really enjoyed about social work and kind of our background in social work is the focus on someone's strengths. And that's
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really understand or think a lot about before going back to school for my master's. And really, it completely, like, shifts the way in which you look at yourself, but also in the way that you look at other people, because you are highlighting those strengths. Everybody has things
Mm-hmm.
that, their weaknesses they would change about themselves, but also everyone has those strengths, and I think using that to your advantage in self-reflection is so important. So I'm curious how you see, like, compassion versus kind of that beating yourself up, or I don't know, discipline, but like the very
Mm-hmm.
harsh side of that. Like, how do you see that play out in
Yeah.
reflection?
Yeah, I first got to take an opportunity to get on the social work soapbox here because you know, Hannah and myself are both social workers. We're both trained in that lens, and oftentimes we get questions. I'm like, what's the difference between a social worker and a counselor and a psychologist and that stuff? Now, I can't speak for any other disciplines, but I will say as social workers, you know, like Hannah was saying, we're trained in a strengths-based systematic model. And what that essentially means is that everything's a system, nothing happens in isolation, and strengths-based often can get discarded as like, look on the bright side. But that's not what it is at all. It's what resources do I have internally or externally that I can use to my advantage. And a lot of times as clinicians, our job with someone well before we start getting to the quote unquote problems they bring to the table is helping them illuminate the things they already have,
Mm-hmm.
helping them understand, oh, I'm not as helpless as I thought. Oh, I'm not there. I can actually do these things. And if they're not there, helping them cultivate it, right? And that strength of compassion is almost always in the work that I do, one of the first things we want to get an understanding of,
Mm-hmm.
right? One of the first things we want to do, because it's so easy for us to focus on what's not going well. And I think that, you know, you mentioned like, I don't know, our society or whatever. I think it's a distorted evolutionary trait, right? Back in the day when we're being chased by saber-tooth tigers and all that good stuff, we had to look for the dangers all the time, because if we didn't look for the dangers, we would get eaten by a tiger. Well, our society is no longer being chased by saber-tooth tigers anymore, right? But our brain mechanisms are the same. So there's a piece of us that can be beneficial, right? Look out for what might harm you, stay safe, go from there. But we can run with that, right? We can really take that and go for it, where we become our worst enemies.
Right.
So, you know, to answer your question and kind of where that line is, it's always important, I believe, to start with an understanding of what am I coming in with? What am
Mm.
I showing up to the table with? How am I approaching this moment? And this is really emotional intelligence 101. And sometimes I'll get some feedback from some clients on a thing that I do that they find very, very frustrating. Is they'll come in and they'll say, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm scared, or whatever it is. And I'll go back very kindly and say, how do you know you feel that way? Tell me what you feel in your body. What is happening physically and where do you feel it? Can you fully understand what it means like to be in this emotion? And the reason that's important is because if I'm trying to engage in self-reflection, but I'm coming in angry, I'm coming in scared, I'm coming in sad, that is 100% going to affect how useful or how honest that self-reflection is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm coming in with anger, coming in with shame, coming in with desperation, right, coming in with helplessness, it's very easy for that compassion to go right out the window,
Absolutely.
right?
I love that like idea of emotional intelligence. It reminds me of Brene Brown has something, I think in one of her books or maybe a TED talk that I've seen. I don't know. I feel like I've seen a
She's
lot.
everywhere.
She's everywhere, which is great. I love her. But anyways, she talked about this idea of like, I don't know if she calls it spoons or like a percentage, but when her
Mm,
husband comes home, if she's been at the home and like has been working, but also taking care of the kids, when she and her husband meet, it's like, all right, I'm at 60%. I'm at
mm,
80%, and just acknowledging, hey, here's what I'm coming to the table with. This is how I feel. And the other person also acknowledging, hey, here's how I'm coming to the table. Like, yeah, I
mm,
can pick up some slack for you right now. Or like, no, I'm there with you. I'm in the trenches too. What can we do to like take some stuff off of our plate? How can we be more compassionate to ourselves and provide an environment that will cater to helping to care for us, whether that's getting takeout or, whatever that looks like.
yeah.
I think that like emotional intelligence is really important to know what you are bringing into the table. Um, and for me, that Brene Brown idea example just kind of came to mind as like a practical way, to look at, hey, I'm at X%, or I've got 5 spoons out of 10 spoons, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and as we get kind of closer to the end, we're going to give you guys a little bit more practical information, because right now we're like deep in theory and ideas and concepts, and we'll kind of turn into more of this like tangible stuff we can do. I really like kind of how you bring it, because self-compassion and understanding what I'm coming in, it's important to distinguish. This is not an excuse, right?
Right.
It's an understanding of what's happening, right? So I had a terrible day at work, and I'm trying to think about, oh well, Lisa was such a jerk to me, so I'm allowed to be this way. I'm allowed to be upset. Of course it's happening. And that's not what it is. It's simply saying, this thing happened. Now I feel this way. Now, how do I think when I feel this way? And why am I thinking this way, right? So I can engage in what makes sense. Because while, in doing something in compassion, right? And there's three kind of main streams of compassion. There's the compassion that we give to other people, the compassion that we receive from other people, and the compassion that we can extend to ourselves. And most times individuals have trouble with that last one, right? Trouble with two, trouble with three. Usually as a people, we're pretty good about giving it out to others, right? But we have a hard time receiving it, and certainly a hard time turning it inward. The good news is if you can give it, you have the ability to receive it. The muscle is already there, right? Which is nice. But it's important, I think it's important to stress that being compassionate about yourself doesn't mean you don't have discipline, and doesn't mean you don't set standards, and doesn't mean you don't acknowledge where things didn't go well.
Right.
But you use it appropriately and you reflect on it appropriately, right? So I want to be the next great marathon runner, right? I'm going to do it. I'm going to get it. And I go out and I have a bad run, right? There are some people, there are some strategies that say, you're nothing, you're useless, you can't do this, right? Why do you even try? Why bother, right? And use that negativity as the force to motivate you forward. This may not be surprising. I have major problems with this strategy, right? But the problem is not that you're using a deficit to motivate, in my judgment. The problem is you're assigning it to the wrong thing. Me being bad is not the same thing as I had a bad run. Doesn't make me a bad person. A piece of me did it, right? You're no good. You'll never do anything, right? That is not at all the same thing as you finished 5 minutes slower than you did before. That's a fact. And I bring up the 5-minute piece because the big part about doing this with compassion and intentionality is quantifying it, right? So someone comes to me and they say, I really want to understand my emotions better. One of the first things we'll do is we'll say, okay, I want you to carry a notepad around you all day. And when you feel a big emotion, I want you to write down what you think it is, and I want you to rate it 0 to 10 with how intense you feel it. And by putting those numbers on it, we're simply gathering data about what's going on. Because once I have data, I was at 8 anger 10 days 10 times last week. I think instead of goal, I want to be at a 7. And now I know what I'm working for, as opposed to just kind of wandering around. And that's a compassionate way to be honest about where I want to go, but also see it for what it is, as opposed to this kind of overall reflection of everything's terrible, nothing, what's the point?
Right. Yeah. And I would love to kind of dig in a little bit more to that, like, over generalization. So what I hear you saying is that there's such a difference between saying, hey, I had a run where I was 5 minutes slower, and so, like, maybe that wasn't a good run, versus, hey, I had a bad run and now I'm not a good person. You told me a couple of days ago a really good kind of story or metaphor or way to think about this. And I'm curious if you could repeat it now for our viewers.
I don't know if I remembered it specifically, but it is, again, borrowing from the internal family systems, the IFS, this idea of parts, right? This idea of seeing it what it is. And in cognitive behavioral therapy and CBT, we have these things called core beliefs, right? And it usually boils down to, I'm not lovable, I'm no good, or everything's my fault, right? And those kind of spreads out from that, right? The problem is when you start using these terms, everything, always, right? I can't. These are massive generalizations that have no proof to them.
Right.
The data is not that I'm bad. The data is I did something I didn't want to do. Now, there's a very fundamental CBT step that says, let's find all the data that challenges that, right? Let's look, you say that you're ugly, let's find all the data that says you're beautiful, right? You say you're slow, let's find all the data that says you're fast. And one of the things I hear from other clinicians, from clients, that can be almost kind of like insulting when they go down that route. Because it's like, are you trying to convince me that I don't know myself? Are you trying to convince me that I'm not being rational right now? And the answer is no. It's not that I'm trying to convince you of one thing or another. I'm asking you to look at the data. What is the data telling you? And if you're having a hard time looking at that data, that's when we go back to the, what am I bringing to the table? What
Mhm.
might be getting you in the way? So all these things we're talking about, Hannah, we haven't even picked up our first pen, right? We haven't even answered our first prompt.
Right.
Like anything with mental health, and really, maybe we could make an argument about most things in life that are worth doing. It's a lot of work beforehand. It's a lot of work about getting yourself ready to do it. Now, you don't want to spend your entire life preparing because you have to jump in at a certain point, but you want to be aware of what's going on,
Mhm.
right? So I think if we're talking about this intentional self-reflection, I would always start with, okay, why? What are you hoping to address? And the more we can slim it down, and this might take weeks, it might take months, it might take years. I want to address my concept of self-esteem. Okay, that's pretty big,
Right.
right? But that's where we're going to start. That's where we're going to start, right? And you can slowly start pivoting, and then you have tangible things that you can work with. But my my therapeutic style is very direct, right? I say oftentimes I'll kind of hold the mirror up. So if you say something that you don't want to be doing and you're doing it, my job, I believe, as a therapist, is to be like, hey, you're doing that thing again.
Right.
Can we acknowledge it? Not from, oh yeah, you're right, I'm just so terrible. No, it's not that you're so terrible. It's that you did it again. What's going on, right? How can we kind of play with it? Because I do think we should, as people, right, as a society, should learn from our failures. We should be able to look at those things that we didn't like and use them as motivators to move on. But we have to do it safely, and we have to do it with the right reason. And oftentimes when we're in some of our lower spots, our reason is just, I want to find more ways to convince myself that I'm no good.
Mhm.
Right. So am I aware that I'm doing that? Right. So I think that's a big thing. I think though, now we can kind of turn a little bit and talk about how we actually do this.
Yeah.
Right. So we're going there. So if I'm your client and I say, Hannah, I listened to this Brene Brown podcast about carrying spoons or ordering takeout in percentages, or, I don't know, what do I do? Do I buy a journal? How do I pay attention? Right. For the complete novice, right? Where do you think you might start things?
I mean, I think it depends on the person, you know? I think there are a lot of different ways to begin to engage in self-reflection. So like you said, you kind of hone into what you want to examine and what you want to be kind of getting to and thinking about. Once you kind of have all of that done, then, I think of journaling. I also think of just like really quick, either in the moment or like in certain times of the day. I have a client who likes to take like the 10 minutes before our session and write down 3 emojis for how they feel. Like it can be something
Mm,
so small. It doesn't even have to be
yeah,
words. It can be emojis, right? Um, I think of mindfulness, especially as a way to kind of get you into the place to start to self-reflect. I think that's a way for us to know, hey, where we are, how many spoons, how many percentages, how many whatever we're coming into this with. I think mindfulness is a great way to check in with your body and yourself. Um, so yeah, kind of off the top of my head, those are the things that come to mind for me. What
yeah,
about for you?
totally. So you said the M word, mindfulness. I think mindfulness is the avocado toast of healthcare. It is hip, it is there, it's in your face, right? It's palatable. It's also, in my judgment, one of the most distorted concepts we have, right? Mindfulness does not have to be close your eyes and meditate for 30 minutes,
Yeah.
right? That's one way to do mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is, in as simple definition as possible, understanding what is happening now.
Hmm.
Our minds almost very regularly, but especially if we're not feeling so hot, are going to be focused on the past, either things that have already happened or concerns about the future, right? Fear
Yep.
of what's going to happen. And if by default, if we're in the past or we're in the future, we're not here. And here is where our reality is. So mindfulness is anything we can be doing to understand what that looks like. My favorite way to practice mindfulness is eating. 100%. Take something you've eaten a million times before, like a single baby carrot or a single Skittle, a single M&M, and see how slowly you can eat that product. Promise you it's going to taste different. It's going to feel different. It's going to smell different. It might bring up memories around it, right? I guarantee you it's a different thing. And what you're doing is you're just training yourself to know what is happening now. So that mindfulness piece, I think, is a essential precursor to doing the work, but also something that needs to be maintained in real time.
Right.
You also brought up journaling, and I think there is such power in making something tangible, in making something where I can see it, because oftentimes we can really go far off places, and our brains move so fast, right, that they can cover so much that simply getting something down is helpful. Seeing it is helpful. And then again, we talked earlier about the number part, quantifying it is super helpful. Yeah. I love the suggestion about utilizing the emojis, especially for folks who might not have the vocabulary or the desire to have the vocabulary around the emotional intelligence, right? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle is a great one. Stoplight is a great one. I'm feeling red, I'm feeling yellow, I'm feeling green. Yep. Sometimes with families that I work with that have younger children that don't have the intellect for that yet, right? They put various pictures on their fridge and they move a magnet to where they are, right? But finding some way to get it out there and having understandability is tremendous, right? So I agree with all those things. And then the thing that I add to it is starting very, very small, like micro small. If you've never engaged in any kind of self-reflection before intentionally, right? Because we're doing it all the time, by the way, but this intentional piece of it, some personalities, myself included, right? Here's this new thing I learned about, let me go at it, right? But if I've never done that before in my life, and I set a goal that every day I'm going to journal for 30 minutes, right? I'm setting myself up to fail, and I'm setting myself to go, I'm bad for doing that, right? Maybe my start is 5 minutes before I go to bed. I'm going to write down the emotion that I'm feeling. Right? Simple, straightforward. And maybe I don't even want to do it every day. Maybe I set a goal for 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Right? There's so much power in achieving your goals. There's so much data that tells us when we can set a goal and we can achieve it, it reminds us, oh yeah, I can do that thing. But the problem oftentimes many people get into, and this can fall back into the compassion piece of it, right? Well, I did that, but so what? I should have been doing that. Yeah, whatever. I cleaned my room today, but I should have been doing that forever ago.
Right.
Right. And it's like, well, okay. So can we pivot that a bit? Right. So when I don't know where I heard of it. I think it was like one of the original like memes years ago. But the quote was, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Right. So if I haven't brushed my teeth for a year and then I brush my teeth for 30 seconds, they're objectively 30 seconds healthier than they were before this past year. And anyone who's ever struggled with something, especially something that they're judging themselves, saying the world thinks this is easy, just that barrier to entry.
Yeah.
I want to run a marathon, which is a terrible example for me, by the way. I would never ever do, but I want to run the marathon, but I can't even get around the block. So what's the point?
Right.
Versus, I got around the block. I got halfway around, right? If I can set it and I can see myself doing it, now I've got this little micro data that says, oh yeah, I can do difficult things. Difficulty is subjective. It changes based on where you are, right? The things that, I don't know about you, like we had similar paths, I think, where we took some time off between undergrad and graduate school. And when I was on the toes of like getting back into grad school, the idea of like writing a paper or like simply sitting in a class for 2 hours was like, there's not a chance I can do this again.
Right.
And then fast forward, a year later, it's like, oh yeah, you learn, you go for it, right? So thinking about tangible ways to start small notice is definitely why I send people to.
And I think that example is actually something that I think of with running, because I played sports as a kid and I did do like track, but short distances. I was never a long distance runner. And then I kind of got into running a little, and I was like, you know what, that would be cool. That'd be nice. It'd be nice to spend some time outside and not pay for a gym membership and just have to have tennis shoes. And so, anyways, I started to do a training plan for a half marathon. And I actually started it with a friend of mine who is not a runner, not an athlete at all, really. But it was so fun to do it together because that didn't matter because your body
Mm,
gets better as you continue, and the plan is such that like the first time you run around the block. The second time you run maybe
mhm.
a block and a half, so it is that gradual kind of those small steps and those small increases. And the more that you do, the better equipped you are to deal with the next run. Like, I think that
Uh,
that is the thing that's so great about having these small incremental goals and
mhm,
something that, it's the end of February. So I think a lot of New Year's resolutioners have kind of fallen off by now because a
mhm.
lot of times we set these big, lofty goals that like maybe we could achieve by the end of the year, but that's not how we want to start. Maybe we want an overall goal of running a half marathon, running a marathon, whatever it is, but you don't start by running that. You start by
No.
around the block. You start by, running 2 blocks, running a mile, getting up to a 5K, working up to a 10K.
Mhm.
And I think as you do that, your body gets stronger, your mind gets stronger, like whatever you are doing to build that habit gets stronger and
Mhm.
stronger so that it gets easier the more that you do.
Absolutely. And I love that because I think as a clinician, the therapeutic framework that I fall most aligned with, the Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Act. And what I love about it, it's not what I'm doing, it's why I'm doing it. And it's not about a destination of good, better, fix. It's about a journey of integrity.
Mhm.
And that is a tremendous focus, right? I want to lose 50 pounds is very different than I want to be healthier,
Mhm.
right? You can get the same goal. Maybe if you're in the beginning saying I want to lose 50 pounds, and you start engaging, you start doing it in the process of self-reflection, you realize it was never about the weight at all. It was about maybe a concern you had of being around longer for your kids and your grandkids, right? And can I
Right.
lean into that, right? So it's this openness on not what, but why. Because the other piece of this, we talk about, you know, the the, the pitfalls people can run into when they either choose to not engage, they don't. Is Hannah, we've got so many people out there that check all the boxes for a happy life and miserable.
Right.
They have the job, they have the family, they have the car, they have the title, but they don't care about
Right.
it. They don't care because I haven't taken the time to reflect on what does this actually mean to me?
Mhm.
And do I even know what my happiness is? Right. So bring it kind of back to where we all started, this idea of self-reflection. It's understanding self and it's not taking it for granted, right? It's not assuming that, well, I'm doing what I think I should be doing, so it might be good. It's how do I actually know what good is to me and acknowledging that my good is unique and it's comprised with many parts and it's allowed to change. And do I have the skills to notice that? And this is not me saying everyone needs to go to therapy and talk to a therapist about it. It is me saying we can all benefit as a society from learning those skills of understanding self.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So, we mentioned I think the journaling is good. There's some really great prompts out there. I really like there's 3 websites that I often send people to. One of them is called Positive Psychology. One of them is called Psych Central, and the other one's called Therapist Aid. These are very, very approachable websites that take some larger clinical concepts and break them down to a little more layman's terms. They've got great worksheets on there. You can go on these, you can type self-reflection prompts and just get tons of ideas of questions. A question simply, not so much like, how do I feel about my career, right? Can be broken down into what parts of my job give me joy, right? A question on, am I feeling healthy, can be slimmed down into what choices did I make today that I think align with my health, right? They also, all of those websites and anything in general, if you just Google, I really recommend people utilize a thought tracker, sometimes called thought log, sometimes called emotional diary. But that's those first steps in understanding simply what am I feeling, how am I doing it. As you kind of get a little more deeper into this work and start playing with it, I really enjoy utilizing the framework of SMART goals. Goals that are simple, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. Relevant and time-based. That's a really good model for starting doing these things, because I oftentimes will hear these goals and these ways to get their goals that just have nothing to do with one another, right? I need to be a better dad. I need to take care of my kids more. So I'm gonna start cooking on the weekends. Okay, but did you need to cook to take care of your kids? Well, actually, no. My partner cooks all the time, and it's actually totally good. Well, then why are you cooking? Because that's how they show their love. Okay, well, how do you show your love, right? Those kind of things, and it's a fun way to do that. And then I always recommend, when we do these goals, even though we want to focus on the small, the short term, the here and now, let's make sure we have an understanding of what we think our goal may be. Right? We think our bigger goal is. Now, the difference here is that the thing that I'm making definite is what's happening now, and the thing that I'm leaving is hypothetical and maybe is the future. It helps to have a North Star, but my real intentionality and accountability is what's happening now. So that North Star might need to move.
Absolutely.
And that's that power that gets me so excited. Do you have any other suggestions or thoughts on other things people can do as far as like tangible strategies around these things?
No, I mean, I think you kind of covered it. I would say something that, in looking at prompts for self-reflection, something that struck me as being very valuable is reflecting on your values. Um, and just it again speaks to all of your resources, where I'm sure that there are a bunch of value-based questions. But it also speaks to defining those SMART goals and giving you kind of the chance to look at, hey, what is important to me? What is that potential North Star that I'm going towards? But also, how can I achieve this value, or what I am, thinking will be like helpful and align with my value base right now. So I think a lot of times people tend to gloss over some of that values-based self-reflection. And that can be really beneficial.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite like loops I'll get into sometimes with clients is they'll say something and they'll ask me, well, should I feel this way about that? Or do you think that it's that way? And
Right.
I just love saying, it doesn't really matter what I think, right? I'm here to help you figure out what you think about it. And when people can lean into that understanding of they not only have the right, but they are worth having their own opinion.
Right.
They deserve it. It's some may argue their duty as a sentient being to have their own opinion.
Right.
Some being me, right? Oh, now where can we do with that? So I think in addition to these skills around how am I monitoring myself, right? And for what it's worth, I think this is a nice place to draw a line between the differences between therapeutic work and coaching work. As a therapist, you may come to me and you may say, what do you think about this? And I'm going to say, let me help you figure out what you think about it. As a coach, you may come to me and I say, what do you think? I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. And sometimes that's what we need. And sometimes that's what we want, right? That's that accountability piece. So I love sometimes when I work with clients and they'll get to a place where I'll say, you don't need me anymore. What you want is a coach to hold you accountable, but you've done the work there. And that's a bittersweet moment in therapy. But regardless, I got a little bit tangent there. We talk about these skills around like, how do I bring it to the table? How do the methods that I utilize? But the piece on this, if people who are watching take nothing away from this, the skills of self-compassion are so crucial to doing this. Do I know when I'm engaging in it? And do I know how to get back to it if I've slipped a little bit?
Yep. Absolutely.
What does it look like to look in the mirror and try to make eye contact and say you did good, right? That's where we start, right?
Yeah.
What does it look like to sit with that? Because our minds are going to wander. They're going to go, and they're allowed to go, and they're allowed to wander. And our goal is not that we don't have, I believe, the goal is not that these negative thoughts disappear and never come back. The goal is I can see them for what they are, and I have the skill set to be like, oh, it's doing it again. Can I engage in a coping skill? Can I engage in some form of regulation? Can I engage in some form of cognitive restructuring or what it may be to bring myself back here? And if I don't think I can do that in the moment, can I give myself permission to say, this is what I've done so far today, and this is where I'm going to break. And I'm choosing to break not because I'm not strong enough, not because I'm not good enough, because I am skilled enough to know when I've hit my point. And I've hit my point right now, right? So strategies, I think, give you a piece to lean into the distress of it, right? I don't think it's our job in life to make life not stressful. I don't think it's our goal to avoid stress, whatever we do, because life is stressful.
Right.
Life is hard. And the way this world starts for most everybody is an incredibly stressful experience for all parties involved, right? It's tough. And if we want to do things that are hard, it's hard. But man, how good does it feel to be like, oh, that was hard and I did it.
Mhm.
And not only did I do it, but I did it because I wanted to do it.
Right.
Because we get into trouble when, yeah, it was hard and I did it, look what I could do, but I was miserable the entire time.
Right.
We only have so many hours, right? We only have so many minutes on this life. I would never advocate say that you shouldn't be miserable, but I'm definitely not going to say you should have the skills to know when there might be another way for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. A couple things I want to kind of stick out there before we put a nice bow on it. Just folks, everyone to remember to start small, right? Give yourself permission to walk before you run. The name of the game is compassion, and the name of the game is emotional intelligence. Do I know what I'm bringing to the table? Can I engage in it? Any final words of freedom or of wisdom from you?
Freedom and wisdom.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's it. Self-compassion is huge. And I think that piece of intentionality, and being able to engage with self-reflection intentionally and perhaps having those cues to help yourself stay accountable if you're like me and maybe more on the avoidance side, but also stay present and within your time frame if you're like Jack and more on the overthinking side.
Absolutely. Very, very well said. So we want to thank all of you for tuning into this month's edition of News Conscious Conversations. We hope you were inspired, uplifted, and empowered. If you have any questions, feedback, positive or negative, we do want to hear from you. So please feel free to leave us a comment here or reach out to us via email at contact@newcounselingpllc.com.
It's our goal to equip you with the tools to be the best version of yourselves. Everyone needs a safe and supportive place that will allow them to reconnect with themselves through self reflection, perhaps. And if you ever need any additional support, we are here for you. We'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves and each other.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.